Hope everybody's doing well. We have an exciting speaker for you today. I'm excited to introduce Chris Carmody of GrayRobinson, partner GrayRobinson again. Fantastic speaker. We'll be able to recap the 2022 Florida legislative session very succinctly, I am sure. It really has a depth of knowledge very few in the legislative process possess. We appreciate him being here today and his time that he has spent with us here with the Seminole Chamber. So with that, Chris, thank you, and take it away.
Well, good morning, everyone. Hope everyone's having a nice Friday. My son has a late spring break, so ours is next week. This is why I'm glad it worked out today, because I won't be here next week and try to actually enjoy some time off. But good to see y'all, all friendly faces. This session has wrapped up, kind of, and I'll get to that. But they took a little extra time to get it done, but they did get it done. There's several things they covered, but I wanted to kind of start with the two things they had to do. Now y'all all know, constitutionally, every year they're required to pass a budget, which they did. That's the part that took a little long. But this year, in every 10-year cycle, they're also required to pass new maps for both Florida House, Florida Senate, and our congressional seats. The congressional seats, where they're getting there, we'll get into that. But I thought it might be helpful, and I'm going to try to share my screen here for a couple of these slides. But let's talk about the budget, because that shapes everything. They went ahead and it says disabled, so I'll go into it.
It goes now.
Oh, it's good now? Okay, let me try it again. Can y'all see that? Perfect. Okay, we'll see. It was a $112 billion budget. To put that in perspective, that just almost less than 10 years ago, our budget was around 70 billion. So we have creeped up just a little bit here over the last 10 years. And a lot of that's people are moving to Florida. We have more revenue. Some of this includes federal dollars. So I point that out to you. The governor has not received this budget, so he hasn't yet vetoed it, but they have been working, he and his staff, about coming up with the list. My guess is he vetoes about $1 billion, even though everything that's in there is stuff that was kind of run by him before. You're not going to be a governor in Florida unless you're vetoing some of the budget just to make a statement. So I expect he'll cut back some of that, but let's look into what it is. No surprise there in that top left, Health and Human Services, 48.9 billion, education, 25.7 billion, criminal justice, 6.9 billion. And then that lower left row there, 16.5 billion for transportation and economic development. That includes fully funding our road plan, which is about a $10.5 billion hit. The governor also got funding for his job growth grant fund, which that's sort of like his little pot of money that he can do for projects around the state. And there's also significant amount of money for broadband infrastructure in rural areas. So think, it's easy to say panhandle because a lot of that's rural, but think that area and some other parts of the state, north of Central Florida, south of Jacksonville, there's some areas there with the exception of Gainesville that are pretty rural, and they're looking to put broadband in. 9.3 billion for agriculture and natural resources. If you all recall, when the governor was first elected 4 years ago, excuse me, he's not a congressman anymore. He put a proclamation out there that he wanted 2 billion plus towards water quality and improvements in Florida. Part of that budget for ag and natural resources has creeped up every year as a result. And this year with these dollars, he'll be right at that $2 billion mark, just in time for election season, as I like to say. And then as well, the bottom right, that $1 billion in inflation fund. So this is new. It got a little press because they called it, the name of the fund was the acronym Biden, which I don't think was on accident. Republicans like to pick on Democrats and vice versa. That's how this goes. But essentially, it's a fund that will allow all the departments and agencies to tap into over the course of the next year as the cost of goods goes up. So as they're procuring, whether it's for roads or whether it's for IT or what have you, if they're procuring services and they think it's gone up, they can tap into this fund. And I call this just another way to also not put it into other special projects or other things. they literally had more money than they knew what to do with this year. I mean, 112 billion, just put that in perspective. Last year's budget, even before the vetoes, was only 105 billion. So just over the course of a year, that budget has increased by 7 billion. And as you see at the top there next to the circle, 8.9 billion in reserves. And so that's, I mean, we're swimming in cash this year in Florida, and that's probably going to stay the same. A lot of that's because of the governor's policies. A lot of that is just also the fact that no matter what happens, people want to come here and visit here for tourism, and the construction industry is booming. But we point that out. So that was one thing they had to do. Like I said, the governor is, they will send that budget to him eventually. My guess is they do it after the special session. So part of that is, let's talk about that special session. And let me see if I can pull up that slide for you here. There are some maps they were trying to do. So let's talk a little bit about redistricting. Can everyone see that slide there?
Yeah.
All right. So House and Senate, there were maps passed by the legislature. The House maps were essentially, the House and Senate maps were approved early on in the process without much fanfare, and approved by the Supreme Court on March 3rd. So pretty early in the process, they said, these are good to go. And I'll kind of talk about what those were. The congressional maps, on the other hand, not so much. And those congressional maps, a lot of it had to do with both a Central Florida seat and a Jacksonville area seat, both minority access seats. So, and I'll show you what our maps look like if you're curious. But to get into the congressional maps and why they have a special session, the governor did veto it on March 29th, and they essentially all agreed that there'd be a special session April 19th through 22nd. A lot of folks thought that might be a property insurance special session and some other things, but it's just going to be about the congressional maps. And by the way, it is not done. They have not figured out what they're going to do with this yet. The Senate, if you've heard the governor's comments, the Senate president's comments, the Senate has sort of gone along and saying, we're going to do whatever the governor wants. The House, Speaker Sprowls and his members, not so much yet. And you know, this is what happens when you got personalities in the process. They're not robots. They're not like, well, this is what I'll do and I'll do that. No, they have emotions and everything. And the Speaker and the governor are not getting along on this map just yet. So they're trying to work through it. So what were the issues? The House and Senate passed maps, which in my opinion, and granted, I'm not a constitutional congressional map drawing a lawyer at cartography, I think is what they call it. But it is, the federal law requires minority access seats. And that's under the National Voting Rights Act. Now, meanwhile, Florida's constitution requires compact seats that also follow, to the extent they can, county or city boundaries, and they don't favor or disfavor incumbents, don't favor or disfavor a party. The governor has suggested that the maps that were drawn, that were also, by the way, approved by the more liberal Supreme Court about 10 years ago, the maps that were drawn for Congress were not compact enough. So they violate Florida's constitution, even though they may honor the federal law about minority access. He also made the point that, at least in the case of the Jacksonville seat that goes all the way to Tallahassee, that's, and if you've seen it, just imagine, yeah, I'm trying to make sure I can do it right here. Jacksonville over here, and it literally stretched all the way across the Tallahassee. That was Al Lawson's seat. He would suggest that it wasn't a majority access, it was a plurality access, because technically there's only 44% African-American in that particular seat. Val Deming's seat down here, the governor has also suggested, is not a majority access seat, it's a plurality access seat. Now, granted, they still perform minority access, right? Al Lawson is the congressman there, because with 44% African-American in a seat, most, not all, but most end up being Democratic. And as a result, the Democratic nominee almost always ends up being African-American in those seats, and therefore elected into Congress. That is how they become minority access. The governor would suggest that they need to be majority access, meaning the actual majority of the members in that district, regardless of party, are African-American, and he wants them compact. The House disagreed. They passed their maps. The governor vetoed it, and now that's why they're in special session. And as I said, they have not completed that special session, or meaning the maps behind the scenes have not been drawn. And so what I've been told by a lot of folks is the Speaker and his team are trying to whip votes to try to get people to stay united. But here's the politics of all this. And again, I keep saying, I'll show you the maps, then I'll show you the maps. The budget has already been passed by the House and Senate. The budget has not been signed by the governor. If you're a sitting House member, say you're David Smith or Scott Plakin, or Joy Goff Marcel, if you will, in the Seminole area, and you've got something in the budget, who are you probably going to listen to? The guy who's leaving office, the Speaker, who's going to be done by November, or the guy, the governor and his staff, who can veto your project that you're trying to bring back home. These are the politics that are going on right now. This is why I tell you the Senate in many ways have said, fine, governor, do what you want. Here's what's going on though. I think behind the scenes, everyone agrees it would be nice if the laws could change a little bit. The issue with minority access seats is once they've been set up, you can never really change them because the whole idea is you can't take away that minority access. That's a good thing, by the way, at least in my opinion, that's under federal law. But the problem is that the other side of that is you can never really change them. If it's a minority access seat, it has to stay one in perpetuity, so to speak, or you violate the law. What the governor is suggesting is we can change those seats. We could still have minority access seats, but they don't have to look the way they did the last cycle. We can shift them a little bit. Here's my prediction. I think the governor's going to win on this one, politics being what they are. And I think then we're going to find out if the governor was right or wrong. He's got a conservative Supreme Court. As conservative as they are, I think they're still going to follow whatever they think the law is, and not just because they like the governor. So if the governor and his team did it right, it'll pass. If they think they did it wrong, they'll kick those maps back and say, redraw them or we'll draw them for you. So I've pulled up Seminole House maps. Can you all see these maps I've got up here? They're showing up great.
Yep,
so
we got them.
This is where, and some of you may be familiar here, so I'm going to shift this around here. So this is, those blue lines are county lines. So this is where the House maps currently look here. Actually, you know what? I apologize. That's a congressional map, I think. Let me make sure I get the right one here. Yes, this is a House map. Okay, so let's fix that for you. That was Jacksonville. We'll zoom here. So you can see now how the House maps look.
And well, Chris, didn't you want the congressional map?
I can show that, but frankly, Central Florida's congressional map is going to be less affected. I can show you the parts that will be affected, but with the exception of Val Deming's seat that was less affected than the one in Jacksonville, it's really not that big of a deal. But I'm happy to show you all.
No, that's fine. Please keep going where you were going.
So this is your House maps, and I'm going to make sure I've got the right graphics up there. So these, I'm going to take away the layers. This is just with the county lines. If I click this layer, you can see this adds what they were before. So you can see how they shifted a little bit, these green lines there. But essentially, they've kind of stayed the same. The seats have shifted a little north, a little east, basically to add population or shrink population. No surprise there. Oviedo area, a lot of population growth. So that seat shrunk a little bit. Whereas if you look down in 35, that's the little pink area on the east in Orange County, that area had to grow because the population hasn't grown as much there. So this is, again, without the overlay. But no surprise here, the downtown area is really compact, and Seminole County will have 4 seats, 3 that are primarily Seminole County, 1 that gets a little bit of that new Apopka seat, which a lot of folks have jumped in there. And if you go all the way to the west, you can see Lake County has just 2 dedicated seats where they don't bleed over into anywhere else. They just have 2 of their own seats. So I'm going to pull up that Senate map for you. This is where Senate. The only difference is if you look, and I'll pull up if I can do it right, the overlay of what it used to look like. You can see seat 10, it used to be primarily Seminole and it went up into Volusia, but when you take that away, the Volusia part has gone away, and now it's just got a little more of Orange County. That dips. I actually would almost be a part of Jason Broder's seat, where that little dips down in the Winter Park, where that little jut is. That's Baldwin, so I don't make it. Baldwin Park does not make it in, but parts of Orlando do, and a lot of Winter Park does. That is what I call the Republican part of the seat. Instead of Volusia County, they went ahead and got the Winter Park area to add some Republicans to balance that seat out. But as you can see, seat 17, which is Linda Stewart's current seat, essentially, that hasn't changed too much for a while. Coach P, Renee Placentia, was thinking about running, but I'll put that seat more in view. The way this is drafted, though, it was just going to be pretty difficult for anyone that's not a Democrat named Linda Stewart to win. And then you can look over there. It's the Lake County seat, the Lake County seat all the way to the west. Over here, I'll shift it 13. You see it picks up a large part of Orange County, mainly some Disney parts. That's that Bay Lake area. And that'll likely be Dennis Baxley's seat. And then District 15 there, which is the light blue, that is what used to be Randy Bracey's seat that Camilla Brown and Geraldine Thompson are looking to run in. So that is where that is. And then 25 is Victoria's seat. And if you're curious about Osceola, that's going up there. But little fun Political drama, and I'll end with this. I'm going to shift over here. There is a seat here. Yep. This one over here, 29, that Aaron Grawl is thinking about. Excuse me, I'm going to mess this up. Over here, Aaron Grawl is thinking about running for this seat. The governor has said he may weigh in on that seat. As you know, the seat has a little population portion on the East Coast, and then it picks up all of this South Osceola County area that's mostly rural. But pay attention to that. The governor has already cleared one primary over on the West Coast in Blaise and Bolia when he weighed in and said he was going to endorse Blaise. All of a sudden, the competitor went away. The governor may start weighing in on some of those other races. So I put that on your radar. But we'll go here and talk a little bit more on a couple more slides. So I want to talk about a little bit about the social issues, and then we can get into, if you want, some of the business issues. But reason I bring up the social issues is this session, you can't talk about this session. This is the stuff that grabbed the headlines. So I thought I'd help explain what's going on there. So it's probably important to note, most of the bills that pass, 90% of them are bipartisan. They're supported by both sides of the aisle, but there's some issues that dominate the headlines that I think is important because they take up a lot of the air in the room. They take up a lot of the conversation, and they affect what we as lobbyists work on, because if it's like the abortion day in the Senate or the House, that's going to be 12 hours of debate, amendments, what have you, and nothing else gets done in the House that day. Same thing in the Senate. The Senate had several sessions that went past midnight. The House had multiple sessions that went past midnight, again, taking up the air in the room. So one, there's the abortion bill that you heard about that was passed. It provides no abortions after 15 weeks with no exceptions. There were a couple attempts to put some amendments on there with exceptions. Those did not pass. The Individual Freedom Act, this is one also called the Stop Woke legislation that the governor referred to it as. This is one I promise you will be challenged pretty quickly. It does two things. For employers, it says you can't have any kind of training, licensing, credentialing, or what have you that's contingent upon your employment or moving up in employment. That would be teaching to use a parlance, would be teaching woke ideologies. This, as you can imagine, a lot of companies, most of us work for companies that have some sort of sensitivity training and what have you. This is something that has not gone over well with the business community. It will be challenged in law, and I'll see where it goes. Frankly, under the Commerce Clause and a few other constitutional provisions, it probably will get struck down. It's hard to tell businesses what they can teach or not teach, but that didn't stop them. And then as well, this would also go into the classroom and say that you can't teach certain types of curriculum that would position telling one child that because of their race or background is that they're responsible or better than or what have you than another race or background. That's essentially what they were going for with that. So that is passed. The governor is absolutely, I'm not sure if he signed it yet, but he will. A couple others that took up some air in the room: parental choice in education, or as the opponents of this bill referred to, the Don't Say Gay legislation that obviously caught a lot of national headlines. Obviously, the bill doesn't reference gay. Specifically, it talks about teaching gender identity and sexual orientation in grades K through 3. But as at least one member on this Zoom knows, because of her role in the school board, this has certainly caused a lot of consternation in many communities. And if you notice, I'll just say this employer that I'm not going to mention by name, that's a large employer in Central Florida that has a large presence in Tallahassee through lobbying, they came out and spoke against it. And let's just say that's been an interesting wrinkle throughout this process, as that's gained national headlines and has somehow led to conversations about potentially repealing the special district that this employer operates in and drives our Central Florida economy. I'll just say we don't like to talk about Bruno, but we do love that movie in our house. Hopefully this all settles out, but that bill continues to make waves. What I will say is Equality Florida, as you may notice, filed a lawsuit on this. Unlike the CRT bill, the critical race theory bill, they drafted the critical race theory bill, I think, in such a way that, at least on the school portions and other ways, that it's going to be ripe for challenge. Like I said, Commerce Clause. But the way they drafted parental choice in education, I actually think this will pass pass our constitutional muster challenge. I don't think it's going to be overturned. As you all know, in the Constitution, there's not specific protections when it comes to gender identity or sexual orientation as opposed to race and creed. And I just think the Florida Supreme Court, much less the US Supreme Court, is going to have a hard time overturning. I think they were very careful in how they drafted this, and they knew what they were doing there. Never mind the fact that the rhetoric around it certainly created a firestorm, and it's unfortunate for that. But the way it was written, I don't think it's going to pass a legal challenge. And then immigration, it wouldn't be a legislative session if we weren't doing something with immigration. This was another bill that was looking to go towards it. You probably heard about this. The governor was concerned that there were folks that were transporting immigrants, children of immigrants in the dead of night, what have you. That if it's an issue, yeah, we should address it. Was it an issue? That's yet to be proven out. In fact, there was some news coverage where they found that there was actually no instances they could find in Florida of this. Nevertheless, the governor will sign this bill. He did kind of get him sideways with the Catholic Church, which I always say, careful going against, God. But, if you recall, Operation Peter Pan or Pedro Pan down in Miami, these operations are still in effect today and largely supported by the Catholic Church and the diocese down in Miami. And they had issues with this bill because they believe this would actually make their humanitarian efforts, if you will, illegal. So some of this will be sorted out, and the federal government certainly has a role to play on this. I wish they'd play a greater role, and I think we all wish they would, in kind of sorting out our immigration issues. But those were sort of the social conversation issues that took up the air in the room. And I tell you that just because that's what gained the headlines, and so you can understand what it is. These were almost all party line votes. But that is where those go. So let's talk about something you may care a little more about, some business issues. Insurance. This was not a good session if you're trying to do some insurance reform. If you've been paying attention, the property insurance package failed during session. You have Senator Jeff Brandes, who said he's going to do a survey to have a special session. Look, if you believe what you read, and I tend to believe it, we are at a crisis point in our property insurance market, not just for homeowners, right? Citizens is about to balloon, but also in commercial insurance. I talk to all my commercial clients, say their commercial property insurance is ballooning as well. Jeff Brandes, before he leaves office, he's turning out, is trying to make one last go at this. The governor has said he wants to have another go at this. Here's where the rub is, right? Everyone agrees there's an issue here. The speaker, Sprouse, who's outgoing, he has suggested that he wants to have last year's legislation that they did for property insurance take effect. Give it a year, give it a time. Here's what some of that is going on. Any meaningful property insurance reform to cut down our rates, whether on commercial or citizen residential, would mean some sort of tort reform, right? Some of the major reasons for the costs are all these roof claims and what have you. And with all due respect to our patron saint of constitutional amendments, John Morgan, and his firm, they're part of the problem, right? They are suing. These are folks, they knock on your doors, they say, I'll get you a new roof and you don't have to pay a dime. Turns out you have to pay some dimes, more than a few dimes, but they're also suing the insurance company. It's just ballooned. Florida, I saw a statistic, and you may have heard it, has about 8% of the property damage claims in the country. We have 80% of the lawsuits. Let that sink in. For all of our hurricane, our hail, everything else, it rains constantly in our state. We have only 8% of the claims, which sounds about right for a state our size, but 80% of the claims, we have a tort problem. And unless they're going to do meaningful reform on that, that's the only way they're going to fix it. Here's the issue. Speaker Sprouse, it's no secret that he is closer to the trial bar than those in the Senate or the governor. Many thought this was going to be the year of cause of action. Fortunately, the Senate was able to beat a lot of that. And here's the last thing I'll say is why we won't have a special session anytime soon is the governor, when asked about it, says, yeah, we'll do that when Renner's in charge. That was a shot across the bow. Paul Renner's the speaker that's going to be taking over in November. So if you're holding your breath, I wouldn't hold it for too long. But in November, after the elections and the organizational session takes place, my guess is you'll have a 2 or 3 day special session on property insurance. So pay attention to that. All right, let's move forward here. Data privacy, you probably were paying attention to this. If you're in any size business, you take people's data, whether it's a chamber, whether it's a credit union or anyone else. Are you actually, Alicia, are you actually standing in front of the building outside? No, I'm kidding. I know that's a backdrop. I love it though. This bill made a lot of folks nervous. Again, here's a common theme here, because it had a private cause of action in it. data privacy polls very well across the board. Republicans, Democrats all agree that we have concerns over data privacy about what Apple or Google or Meta or whoever has our information, right? We're concerned that when we're on those platforms, we are the product. We're not customers, we are the product. And so no one has argued with, we got to do more to tell those companies that they need to better protect our data. Where the issues come up, though, are that private cause of action. The law that was being proposed and passed in the House was actually, from a cause of action point of view, more liberal than California. Just put that in perspective. And in California right now, last I checked, they had over 30 active class action lawsuits, class action, where a ton of people involved over data privacy. Again, that kind of stuff would cripple businesses. Here's who it's not going to hurt, though. It's not going to hurt the Metas or the Googles or the Apples, because they've got billions of dollars, right? I mean, Zuckerberg's worried about the metaverse right now. He's not worried about what's going on Facebook. They can afford to put all the regulations in place to make sure that they're not selling the data or what have you. It's going to affect all of our businesses, right? It's going to affect the folks that keep data. And now you got to hire one more person to be in charge of managing all of that. You're probably going to have to do that to some degree, but you might actually just give someone's role that also does a little bit of accounting's role is going to take on data privacy. If you know you can get sued over it, you're probably going to have to take the expensive step of just hiring someone specific to make sure that all these ducks are in a row so you don't get sued. Because again, not to pick on John Morgan and all his friends of trial lawyers, if they find that there's money to be made there, they're going to make money on that. So I'll get off my pedestal. It died. That's the good news. The Senate was not going to go along on it, but this is going to come back. Hopefully it comes back in more the version like Virginia, which doesn't have a cause of action. It's a little more fair in its point of views. But when you see Jason Broder around town, thank him for help in the Senate for helping kill this, and encourage our House members when they get back to under the next speaker to not let something like this pass next year unless it gets rid of that cause of action. All right, we'll look at a few other cybersecurity. Good news for everybody involved if you care about your information, following that theme on data privacy, is this may be the year, even though those social issues got all the conversation points, this may be the year we look back and say Florida finally got serious about cyber infrastructure and cybersecurity. House Bill 7055 created a statewide framework that address and safeguard the cyber attacks. You can see those bullets there: prevent state agencies and local governments from paying ransoms. So kind of like the 1996 Mel Gibson thriller, Ransom. We do not pay ransoms in Florida anymore. We go after the bad guys. Thank you for kind of laughing at that joke. All right. Also requires...
We all laughed, Chris. Don't worry. We all laughed. We were just muted.
We were all around the 90s. You remember this great film. Before he was crazy. Cybersecurity training for employees within 30 days of hiring. Everyone hears about all those phishing issues that go on in email and what have you, and requires local governments to adopt these standards. This is the first time preemption or sort of local control was not an issue because everyone agreed. They put their money where their mouth is, though. You see all those bullets down there on funding. That's over $100 million towards adopting cybersecurity task force final report, for DMS, for states DMS to do ongoing issues, for $35 million for them to distribute local government grants, and then another $30 million to the USF Cybersecurity Center for training for local governments. They are absolutely serious about this. They recognize that these black hat operations come in. They try to get you to adopt your malware. Once one employee makes a mistake and does it, they hack your system, they hold it hostage, and then they say, pay us X or you're not going to get it back. It's become an industry. It's not a good industry, but it's become an industry there that it makes a lot of people money, and people almost just assume they have the money set aside. Like, we're probably going to get hacked. We're probably going to pay the money to get unhacked. But this now is, Florida's getting serious about it. All right, I'm going to give you a couple more and then be respectful of your time, but I wanted to, we'll do a couple of these here. You probably heard about construction issues. Another issue, cause of action. Again, fortunately, the Senate fought back on a lot of these. There's been a multiple year effort to deal with construction defect reform, Chapter 558, which gives you a right to cure. It has been a process that's been just a litany of issues in that. It started as I'm a recovering construction litigator. It started as, if you're the contractor and you screw up, Ben would call me up and say, hey, Chris, before I sue you, The foundation's got cracks, although that's a major issue, right? I mean, the paint's not good here and there. They give you a punch list and they say, fix this or else. And usually the lawyer sends the letter, but you got a window to cure. Now it's just been used as gotcha tactics. If you forget to send everything in the punch list, we defend and say, well, we're not going to, you can't sue us. Essentially, it's been over leveraged every which way. Residential builders are getting beat up over it. Commercial builders are getting beat up. And oh, by the way, the statute of repose is an issue too, because in Florida, there's all kinds of defects that show up 15 years later and they're trying to fix it. This bill died. It'll be back next year. Hopefully they can get this. The trial bar really dug their heels in on this, trying to fight it. But hopefully it can come back next year and fix it. And then Surfside, we remember the tragedy there. It was unfortunate. Almost immediately afterwards, we knew there'd be legislation. As they peeled back the onion to figure out what happened, it seemed in many ways, other than the age of the building, it had a lot more to do with the condo association and kind of ignoring reports. So they had legislation that was going to address some of those issues. But you can't leave special interests out of the process, and they were in this process, and that kind of slowed this issue down. I expect it'll be back next year. The good news is if you're worried about that tragedy, and obviously everyone was, is that it appears Florida's building code is not some of the issues on this. It was just more a matter of the perfect storm of a condo association ignoring some reports, ignoring some maintenance, and then being the situation of where it was located. It was actually the perfect storm of weather and impact on the environment below. They don't think something like this will happen again, even if a condo association does ignore some maintenance. It really was kind of the worst case scenario. But I expect they'll pass legislation next year that will make sure that regardless, something like this never happens again. Here's a couple here, and then I will keep that promise. Resiliency, there was some legislation that passed dealing with resiliency that further empowers DEP to deal with resiliency issues. Now, most of us think of this as a South Florida issue, but we have flooding issues all across our state, because with the exception of in areas of Claremont and Mount Dora, most of the state is right at sea level or below. And so they're going to continue to deal with this, and they keep putting funding in there for that program. Also point out net metering. Anyone have solar on their rooftop? Anybody? Maybe. Well, this is a bill this is not popular with if you have solar on your rooftop, or if you're commercial. A lot of commercial property owners that have allowed solar on the rooftop, they're a little frustrated by this. My expectation is the governor will sign this. This was being pushed pretty heavily by FP&L, which outside of Disney, FP&L is probably the largest donor across the state as far as political contributions. And last I checked, FP&L hasn't weighed in on the parental choice legislation like the other aforementioned political donors. So I don't think they're in the doghouse with the governor. Basically, what this bill does is it shifts net metering. If you don't know what that is when you put solar on your rooftop, whether it's commercial or residential, essentially your power is sold back to the utility provider if you have excess power, and it's the rate at which it's sold is the big deal. And right now it's sold at the commercial rate, and that is something that obviously the independent investor-owned utilities don't like, because that's, as we get more solar, that will probably become something way too expensive. And so what they've suggested, they wanted to get rid of it altogether, and you just pay instead of the retail, you pay like the bottom basement rate that they would pay is if they were producing the electricity. And what they ended up doing, as you could see in the bullet, is they had a glide path. So if you have rooftop on your solar and you were sold that whole over 20 years, it'll pay for itself because of the rates and the thing, you're grandfathered in. And they're going to do a stair step provision up through 20 years. So if all of us decide to get rooftop solar this summer, we would be grandfathered into the next stair step down. So it won't be as good as our neighbors who got it, but it'll be better than the people that get it 10 years after us or 20 years after us, with this idea that as more solar goes on rooftops and commercial and residential, the investor-owned utilities would have to pay less to offset the power buybacks. Is this a win for the investor-owned utilities? 100%. Like, is it a loss for solar power? Yeah, definitely. And I say that in the sense that right now, the system that's set up is a big win for solar power and solar power investors, right? Because they have to pay that retail rate, the investor-owned utilities. Is it a loss for Florida? Probably not. I think the ship has already sailed. Solar power is continuing to come. It gets less expensive every day that goes by to install and use, and they figure out better ways to store. So this will probably at the end of the day be a net neutral for net metering, and that the investor-owned utilities have a better glide path on how they can get there. The folks for solar that already got it will be fine. And I think over the course of 20 years, the costs will go down in such a way that it'll all balance out. That being said, it wasn't without its controversy because it looked like it was a gift to our investor-owned utilities. You don't know any about those, Alicia. You used to work with them. But like I said, at the end of the day, it'll probably be a net neutral for everybody involved, and at least give the investor-owned utilities a little more predictability as they go forward the next 20 years. All right, let me make sure. And then here's a few others here. I can go over there. A lot of movement in energy, as you can imagine. Florida is we're trying to get ourselves out of there. So I'm going to try to give you a couple more slides. I won't bore you.
I know you got a limited amount of time, so if you need to wrap it up, that we totally understand.
Nope, and I appreciate it. So here's what I was going to do is I'll just run through the higher education and K12 education, since we've got some wonderful community leaders here that deal in that space, and then I'll wrap up here. So higher education, they did a couple things. So Bright Futures, if you've got any children that are going through high school, here's some good news. Instead of just community service hours to get that Bright Future scholarship, you can now use work hours, which is kind of a nice for those of you that require kids to work. I worked at Blockbuster. Anybody remember that? And then and I've watched way too many movies, like 1996's Ransom. All right, so textbook and instructional materials transparency. Anybody remember when you were going to college and like you'd get the syllabus like a day before and the textbook list like barely a week before? Apparently they've listened to this. Thank goodness. We helped on this for UCF student government. So now it's at least 45 days in advance, and it all has to be published on a website for at least 5 years. So if you're researching your professors, you can kind of look at their syllabus or syllabi, and you can look at their textbook list from previous years to get an idea of what this is going to mean for you. That's kind of a nice win. Also, accreditation. I call this the don't mess with a former speaker who's the commissioner of education when he's trying to get a post at FSU, aka the Richard Corcoran Act. If you all recall, Richard Corcoran is looking like he was going to get the FSU job after John Thrasher retired, and then SACS, the Southern Accreditation Institute for the universities that FSU, UF, and a few others belong to, they weighed in on that. They had concerns given his position as commissioner of education, and if it was an overreach, and if the committee that was selecting him was on the bog and such were unbiased. As a result, that essentially scuttled his candidacy and prevented him from getting the presidency there. Someone else, he may have not got it anyways, but he certainly, at that point, it was off the table. And so now they've put in there that you can't, if you belong, whatever. So let's use UCF, our neighboring university here. If they belong to SACS, they can't belong to SACS for more than too many years in a row, and they change the accreditation agency after so many years. The other thing is, if you feel like your accrediting agency has messed or aggrieved you in such a way, like messing with your presidential search, there's a way to file claims now. And again, you can't take politics out of politics. You mess with someone, they're going to bite back. And this was a way to send a shot across the bow at SACS and any other accrediting agency that would get engaged. And post-tenure review. Some folks would suggest that professors get tenure and then they run their mouth and there's never any consequences, what have you. This was a piece of legislation that would say that tenure review is every 5 years. And so it's in theory, and I'll just put my personal cap. As much as I don't like professors just going off all the time, I kind of like the fact that they have the freedom to do so. That's a good thing, freedom of speech. This will certainly kind of cut some of that back as they go through, and I expect the governor to sign this. We'll go through a couple more. Public records. Anybody remember when they do a presidential search, that is a public process. Now, the way they get around it is they hire a search firm that basically vets all these candidates. They ahead of time, they give them all the criteria that they want. Sometimes the criteria all but says we want this provost from this university, an Ivy League school. But the search firm goes and gets all these candidates, and then a week before they hire someone, the search firm goes to the board of trustees in a meeting and says, "Here's your candidates. And oh, by the way, we set up interviews Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday." And it's not a very public process, but it feels kind of shady at the way it's done that way. But they do that because they know that if you're a provost at Harvard Law and you're thinking about becoming UCF's next president, you're not likely to put your name in the mix because if you don't use the search firm, which again is a very non-transparent process, your name's going to be floated right away. And then you got to have a meeting with the Harvard president and say, "You want out? Why are you leaving?" And so they got to deal with that. And especially at those public universities, it's even more tricky. So this was put in place, which essentially would allow it to be a private process. The records would eventually be made public 21 days before either the interview or the final action for the offer of employment. But this now allows that Harvard provost, to use that example, to put his name in the mix. The university can vet that person. And if they think they can be a good candidate, they can move forward or say, no, thank you. And then that person can go back to their job without having to worry about that becoming a public record. So this will probably help in the process. Will it politicize the process? Of course it will. It goes both ways, right? This will now make some of those political appointees a little easier to move through the process, right? Because they will be a hand-picked candidate that maybe is a little more political and you won't know about it until 21 days before. But I'll tell you, 21 days is a long time in the public records world and in the PR world. So if they're too political, whether it's a Richard Corcoran, to use that example from FSU or others, the pressure will get too hot and that person will have a hard time getting that position, but something to pay attention to. All right, and then let's talk, and this is a feel-good one, for disabled veterans. If they don't have enough federal benefits, Florida law now will provide a waiver, on tuition waiver, to make sure that if you're a disabled veteran and you're going to a state university or college, you can go for free. You don't have to pay any extra costs. All right, K12 education, quickly, a lot of these, financial literacy. So you all know of Junior Achievement and others, right? Yeah. For years, Dorothy Huckel, the late great Dorothy Huckel, senator out of Volusia County, had been pushing for this. This now has finally passed. That would now require this kind of education. If you're involved in JA, this is good because this will mean JA now is not just an optional need. They will be a mandatory need for a lot of our schools, which will help support that nonprofit. But more importantly, right, we know how to do fractions. Some of us even learned calculus, but not a lot of us understood how to balance a checkbook or what to do with your credit cards or whatever. Financial literacy is very important, especially as a chamber. From our perspective, we want our folks to understand these things, and this will now be the case. It's shocking that it took so long. Education certification pathway for veterans, again, another feel-good bill and a good thing to do. Permits the Department of Education to waive requirements of a bachelor's degree for issuance of a temporary education certificate in lieu of 4 years of active duty military. And so basically this will allow some of our military folks to be better engaged in the process if they want to be teachers as well. So pay attention to that. K12 school board term limits. Sorry about this, but Member Calderon, if you're still doing this in 12 years, we're going to give you a sanity check anyway. So we're doing this for you. No. This would do 12-year term limits, but it would start after these November elections. So if someone's already served 20 years, they get 12 more. If they've served no years, this is their first term, they would just get 12 max. Now, the more controversial part of this, well, they're both a little controversial, although 12 years is what seemed to work for everybody. Some folks stay longer than 12 years and God bless them for their service, but most folks, 12 years seems to work. Instructional materials is where this was getting much more, this was essentially we don't want this book or stuff taught in our classroom. This is what they went after here. It basically requires a review process if books are going into our libraries and what have you in the media centers. Some of the good news on this is parts of the state where they don't have media center specialists, they're going to go get one, which is a good thing to have someone that's curating your books to help making sure that our students have all the right books in there, regardless of people who are freaking out over one reference of this or one reference of that in a book. And then you hold that staff has to have a valid education media specialist certificate to help select the materials. But this is Florida, right? And we love our state. We wouldn't probably want to move anywhere else, but in Florida, we know there's going to be a county, hopefully it's not Seminole, knock on wood, Tina, where someone is, I don't like that book is being taught, and it's probably a book that's been taught since the turn of the last century, right? We're not talking about some of these new books that make people uncomfortable because it talks about orientation or gender identity. It's going to talk about something that was referenced, I'm worried about like the Huckleberry Fens, right? But there's going to be a book and someone's going to freak out over it. And let's hope it's not Seminole County because the media will love to run that story. All right. I think we got one more on the education slide. Yeah. Oh yeah. Student assessments. This is probably a relief to most parents. I know there were some assessments yesterday, at least in the Orange County system. This is going to significantly cut back on the assessments on the Florida Standards Assessment beginning next school year. So This is a win for parents. I think for most educators, it's also a win. You know, as I'm sure, Tina, you would say, a lot of folks feel like they're teaching to the test and they're not teaching to what the course is. But this is a big win there, and pretty bipartisan on that. So that is essentially that. Maybe I'll leave with this and then answer any questions. These are the next sessions date. We've got elections in November. Organizational session will be somewhat after that. Usually it's 2 weeks after, but 2 weeks after the November elections is the week of Thanksgiving. So my guess is they're not going to have an org session. Committee weeks will be December through February, and then regular session starts March 7th. End of session is May 5th. I hope, because I don't want to be meeting in session beyond that. That's Cinco de Mayo anyways next year. But with that, I'll answer any questions or let y'all have your meeting back. But it's good to be with y'all.
Thank you, Chris. That was fantastic.